Welcome, fellow Phoenixes, to the Spiritual Phoenix Podcast, where we make a daily offering to the divine by putting our past on the pyre, searching the smoke for spirituality, turning the ashes into art, adapting isolation into connection, and manifesting mental wellness. I am a Gray Jedi named Ross Cessna, and I wish to ignite the authentic expression of your soul into any avenue that elevates consciousness. I don't want to tell you what to think, but to get you to think. Create your own understanding, and originally articulate yourself in a way that is uplifting. We are the artists of our lives, and today is a blank canvas. Let's collectively create a better tomorrow. And let's take a moment and focus on what we're grateful for today. Today, I'm grateful for working towards balance in my life. Balance has been so crucial for me, and I think that balance is really key to life, and it's expressed in so many ways in nature and in individuals' lives even, as we are an expression of nature. And with that, I'd like to get into today's quotes. I am one with the Force is with me. And that was said by Chirrut Imwe from the newer Star Wars movie, Rogue One. The next one is, there must be both dark and light. I will do what I must to keep the balance, as the balance is what holds all life. There is no good without evil, but evil must not be allowed to flourish. There is passion, yet peace, serenity, yet emotion, chaos, yet order. I am a wielder of the flame, a champion of balance. I am a guardian of life. I am a Gray Jedi. And that was said by Lenore Denal. And that's a Star Wars character. I believe it's from the fan fictions. I'm not entirely certain. Flowing through all, there's balance. There is no peace without a passion to create. There is no passion without peace to guide. Knowledge stagnates without the strength to act. Power blinds without the serenity to see. There is freedom in life. There is purpose in death. The Force is all things, and I am the Force. And that's the Gray Jedi Code. This is a principle of polarity. Everything is dual. Everything has poles. Everything has its pair of opposites. Like and unlike are the same. Opposites are identical in nature, but different in degree. Extremes meet. All truths are but half-truths. All paradoxes may be reconciled. And that's from the Kabbalion. I trust a man with no shadow as much as I trust a man with no light. And that was said by me. I was thinking of this concept yesterday, and it was reinforced when I was reading The Secret Teachings of All Ages by Manly P. Hall. And one of the concepts in esoteric wisdom is the importance of balance. And the one chapter I was reading further explained my concept of balance and kind of solidified the need for me to talk about this. I'm not going to get into directly reading from that book. If you're interested in it, pick it up. It's a wonderful book. The thing with a book like that, though, is it's written almost in riddles in some ways, and there's many trap doors, I guess, in it. And that's kind of the concept with light and dark. There's trap doors in both. And I'll get into explaining the Gray Jedi then. As we progress, I'll get into the trap doors that I'm referring to. A Gray Jedi is one who can use both elements of the Force. And the benefit of being able to use both elements of the Force is they become less susceptible to the other elements. And one might say, but if it's all good and light, there is no negative element to it. And I'll explain how that may not be the case in reality. And the other thing too is, since they can channel both, they get the powers of both. And Gray Jedi's purpose is not to do evil or harm, it's to keep things in balance. And as I've stated, balance is key. And like I said, they're less susceptible to the effects of either side. And this is kind of like an expansion on the episode where I talk about the philosophy of personal neutralism in many ways. And in there I state that gray isn't the way of personal neutralism. Clear is. But for a material sense, maybe gray is the best expression of it. I feel that the philosophy of personal neutralism, and that this whole concept is best explained as the circle that encapsulates the yin-yang and the invisible line that divides it, because that's where the balance lays. The yin-yang as a whole, or the space in between both of the symbols, or both of the polarities, I should say. And I'll get into the principle of polarity now. As it's stated in the quote that I mentioned, everything has its opposites, but they're also similar. And that might not make sense to a lot of people. Think of polarities rather than two different settings. Think of it as a dimmer switch. And there's thirsty versus quenched. There's lack versus gluttony. There's light versus dark. And the light versus dark is the best explanation of the quote-unquote dimmer switch. Because as you slide it up, it gets lighter, and as you slide it down, it gets darker. But somewhere in the middle of those is the best spot today. And as I was musing over balance, I was swimming this morning, and I happened to get the middle lane, and the people on the left of me were swimming in unison one way. The people on the right of me were swimming in unison the other way, and I was just treading water in the middle lane. And I was on one side of the pool. I wasn't treading water in the middle lane in the middle of the pool, but I was more towards another. And that's kind of goes along with the concept of the philosophy of personal neutralism and the Gray Jedi. The Gray Jedi is more so on the side of good, is my understanding. But they recognize that there is a point where good can become evil almost by accident or unintentionally. And some examples of why balance is crucial would be the Earth in relation to the sun. If we were any closer to the sun, we would be burning. If we were any further away from the sun, we wouldn't exist. We wouldn't exist in either situation. Now, another example of balance would be the habitable Earth in relation to the poles of the Earth. Now, you can live on either one of the poles, really. Existence would be much more hard and rugged. The equator of the Earth, if I'm not mistaken, is where many of the ancient temples or things like that were built by our ancestors rested. There's a line that pretty much runs around the equator, and granted it's likely not 100% perfect, but it aligns with, they align with each other in a horizontal line that splits the Earth in half. And there's a very good principle in that. I mean, even if you look at a pyramid from above, what you see, if you look down on it, there's a center point. and the center point is in between all of the sides. So if the sun is casting on one side and the other side's in shadow, the pinnacle will have both shadow and light. And another example of this balance would be eyesight in light versus dark. If you stare at the sun when it's bright and high in the sky, you're not going to be able to see. Just like if there's no light, you're not going to be able to see. But if you are out in a time when there's the right amount of light for you to see, you can see. And an interesting thing to note is that the concept of sun gazing, which is supposed to help your pineal gland and attune you better with spirituality, occurs within Twilight. And Twilight is the period from in both dusk and dawn when light is diffused into the darkness, but the sun has not yet fully arisen or is slowly rising. So I would consider that, because if I'm not mistaken, sun gazing, you're supposed to do it at 15 minutes, like the 15 minutes during sunup and the 15 minutes during sunset, like right before the sunset, so the sun isn't at its brightest. And another example of this would be, of balance, would be good versus evil. When people do what they perceive to be the greater good, the issue then becomes that they impose their good on other people, which is then, in many essences, bad. And when people do many evil things, eventually some good does come from it. There was a quote by Tolkien that I used in another episode where it talks about evil laboring for no reason. I'm paraphrasing it. Evil will labor for no reason because good will always spring from it. And I think that concept really rings true, but when good gets to a certain point, there can also be evil that springs from that. I mean, how many wars have been waged in the name of peace? How many religions that speak of love have practiced extreme hate? So that's kind of what I am trying to underline with balance. And the concept of the Gray Jedi is that they are in between both of those forces, because if one views darkness as chaos and one views light as order, things can become too orderly. And when that over order occurs, then chaos springs from it. So I'd like to get into the concept of the Twilight worker, which is what I think I'm most identified with. I've tried to fall into the concept of a light worker, but the issue with the light worker is that it creates polarity. The Twilight worker kind of is unifying in the sense that it says we all have some of these elements in us. And I understand that people will say, well, we're light beings. And I don't have enough knowledge to speak against that concept. But I would also say that we are also physical beings. And part of that physicality has urges that some may perceive as dark, and there are some dark tendencies there. So you can only become so light in this manifestation. The concept that I think more people should strive for is the balance of being I don't want to say priest, but being a spiritual person with dirty robes, I guess, because when you detach completely from your dark side, you're not being realistic, and it's as unhealthy as not recognizing or not doing like not doing light things, or pursuing darkness. It's just as imbalanced, in my opinion. And I realize that there may be light and dark, and I accept that. But the unifying principle in all of them is that they're from one, like, dimmer switch or whatever. So when people pursue light, it actually makes the shadows bigger. Think of the concept of a bunch of light being cast on you. It makes the shadows stretch. Now, think of the concept of a light being in a dark area. It makes it brighter. So in essence, they're playing off of each other, and it gets into the whole butterfly effect. It's, for example, look at the far left or far right in politics. They inadvertently create each other, and the more that they try to resist each other, the more that they make the gap bigger, I guess. And my personal philosophy on this is that if we find the unifying concepts within all of them and work towards more of the middle, there won't be a need for as much good as people are pursuing, and there won't be as much evil because of it. And then both things can exist in balance. By light and dark being in the way that they are now, it's imbalance, because when one happens, it throws the other off, and when the other happens, it throws the other off. So it's this constant teeter-tottering. I would suggest that, I shouldn't suggest, for me personally, what I'm working towards is being in the middle, and it goes back to the philosophy of personal neutralism. If I get too positive, I become Icarus, and as Icarus, if I'm flying up in the sky, I lose my shadow. The issue becomes, as I get too close to that source of light, my wings melt and I crash into the ocean. And the issue with being in darkness is I can fall into the abyss. So when I have my highs, I float back down to the surface like a feather on a stream. And when I have my lows, I rise up slowly like a bubble. And I won't say that I'm 100% perfect at it. It's not a matter of being perfect. That's being on one side, light or dark, is substantially easier. I would say that the reason the world is imbalanced is because there's not enough balance in individuals. And I think that I've really... Oh, I'd also like to say this as well about the Twilight worker. The Twilight worker helps people transition. And the light worker might be too bright for somebody trying to come out of the darkness. And a light worker may have a hard time accepting their own darkness. So it becomes the situation of people that have lived in the dark might be repelled from the light worker, and the light worker may be repelled from darkness. But if the light worker is repelled from darkness, they can't necessarily achieve their purpose, which is to spread love and light. They can't necessarily be in opposition. And as a Twilight worker, I am within the ability to help both people, both sets of people if they want help. Um, because for me, I had a hard time accepting my light side, then I had a hard time accepting my dark side, and accepting both of them is key. I think that that's one of the fundamental principles that esoteric teachings talk about. If you look into certain teachings, they talk about different pillars, and I don't want to easily define something that has to be understood without me saying it, I guess. So if you look into the pillars, maybe you can understand what I'm talking about. I wrote a poem about being a Twilight worker, and I'd like to share it. The brighter the light shines, the darker the night grows. The darker the night grows, the brighter the light shines. I walk the path of twilight, light filtered through dark, dark filtered through light. Balance is my eternal home. I rise and fall with the tide, buoyant to all there is. Die beneath the life of day, live beyond the life of night. Be the sunlight in shadows, be the shadows in sunlight. A scale tipping towards one shows an imbalance of both. The twilight is the fulcrum, the cornerstone of the all. A way for light to darkness, a way for darkness to light. I am the light in darkness. I am the darkness in light. I am a worker of twilight. I am a house of harmony. And I'm gonna put this episode on the pyre. And one thing I'd like to note too is ashes, they have white specks, they have black specks, and they have gray specks. So they're the full spectrum. And the links, a link below is the key to my other links. I'm just going to start putting one link with a link to my webpage and all the links. Please take the time to respond to the PodTrack listener survey, as it'll better help me understand my audience. If you're listening to me on one of the podcasting platforms that I'm on, you can also watch me on YouTube. And if you're watching me on YouTube, you can check me out on the podcasting platforms. I love, respect, and appreciate all of you. Make today a magical day with the attitude of gratitude and a mindset of manifestation. Love and light. Namaste.